for my final project, I decided to make cucumber kimchi. So to start off, we have to cut our cucumber, and I decided to make it in this like accordion style, but any style works. And then I'm just gonna put them into the bowl. I have 4 Persian cucumbers. So kimchi is a fermented dish, so I decided to do that for my final project. Fermentation was my topic. In class we fermented some grape juice and turned it into wine, and this I am making kimchi. There's other options that you could have made. There was different types of kimchi. There was other things that ferment, such as milks that turned into cheese and yogurts, and then there's tons of options for what you could have done. That you could have also made sauerkraut and things like that. Fermentation is not the same thing as pickling, as I learned during my research, because in pickling you could have made pickles with this by putting it in vinegar and had it pickle that way. But with this, we're gonna douse it with a ton of salt in order for the fermentation to like begin. So this is the accordion style, and these are very long, so I'm just gonna cut them in half, and I'll do that for the rest. Now, there are many different types of cucumber kimchi. The recipe that I'm following contains carrots and pear. I will be blending the pear in with the spice mixture, however. So next step is I'm going to be using 3 carrots, and I'm just going to peel them and then chop them up. And the way I will be cutting them, I am going to cut them into strips. Okay, so now as for the pear, in the recipes that I saw, they usually blended it in with the mixture just to add a little bit of sweetness instead of adding sugar. I, however, really enjoy a nice little crunch with all my other vegetables in my kimchi, so I'm going to shave a couple pieces and plop that into my mixture before I use the rest of it for the spice. And in the next step, we need to dehydrate. I think that's what we're doing. We're dehydrating our vegetables and trying to get all their juices out with just some salt. So instead of pickling, we're adding salt. And this is just some sea salt. So put a good amount, more than you would just like boil water. Like you actually want to put in a good amount, going with about 2 tablespoons, because you're going to rinse it out afterwards, and you're going to rinse it out well so you don't have a super salty mixture. And then now we're going to get on to the brine. Okay, so for our brine, I'm going to go ahead and put in the rest of that pear, the quarter pear. It's just going to add some sweetness into our mixture. And then I have 2 green onions, which I'm just going to chop up. And then I also have some garlic that I'm going to put in. Sorry, I got lost in my bowl. I'm going to go ahead and put in 2 cloves of garlic. I have red chili pepper flakes. At this point in the video, I want to include a little bit of chemistry about spice. So in the video, you will have seen that we included some Korean chili flakes, and the Korean chili flakes actually have this chemical called capsaicin, which is C18H27NO3, and it is a colorless, odorless, oil-like compound that is found in the fruit of many plants. Capsaicin is a spice that can be measured on a scale. Capsaicin is primarily found in peppers, but it could also be found in smaller amounts in other spices like oregano, cinnamon, and cilantro. But focusing specific to the capsaicin in our Korean chili flakes, we can see that peppers are measured, this hotness of peppers are measured on a Scoville heat scale, which is a series of heat units that range from 0 to 60 million depending on the capsaicin content of the pepper. So to give you a sense, a bell pepper has a capsaicin Scoville heat scale level of 0 heat units, and a habanero has 100,000 to 350,000 heat units. Now, the Korean red pepper lies somewhere around the middle, and it is 10,000 to 50,000 Scoville heat units. So, pretty spicy. So the reason capsaicin creates an extreme heat sensation in the mouth is because the chemical binds to a receptor in the mouth called the TRPV1, and that receptor is connected to the nervous system, and it can send signals of pain to the brain when it senses high temperatures in the mouth. So even though your mouth isn't literally on fire and it literally isn't raising in temperature, your mouth senses that a heat from the capsaicin is increasing exponentially depending on how much heat you consume, and it sends signals to the brain and to the nervous system, causing you to sweat and causing you to become warmer, although the chili pepper is not actually hot itself. The more spice you have and the more frequently you have spice and you build up your tolerance, you actually are able to send those, your body is actually able to stop sending those receptors so often, and it becomes to a point where only very, very high levels of spice will send that heat receptor up to your nervous system. So the way that you can reduce the heat is to actually plug your nose, because a lot of the capsaicin that you feel and the sensation of the capsaicin is not only coming from your mouth but also coming from your nose. So if you plug your nose, you are removing one of the ways that capsaicin will irritate the body, because if you smell it, it irritates the body, causing it to send those receptors as well, meaning that it feels more intensified when it enters the nose. So by blocking it, you are only having it an intense sensation in the mouth. Now, if that doesn't work, you can also ingest sugars and fats. Because capsaicin is lipophilic, it can dissolve fats and oils, which makes it unable to bind to receptors once dissolved. So the sugar can overpower the spiciness with sweetness, which can distract the brain from the burn. And then the fats, so it's having something like a heavy fat like a milkshake with whipped cream that has a high fat content will be a great solution to it, because it's sweet and fatty, so it will all just combat the spiciness. Another thing you can do is have something that is very acidic. So this isn't something that's known very much, because a lot of the spices that we have, like salsas, are very acidic to begin with, but actually capsaicin has a very high pH, and so if you have something that's acidic with a low pH, it will become neutralized and then it won't feel so spicy. I have soy sauce, I have rice vinegar, I have sesame oil, and the recipe also called for sesame seeds. I don't have any on hand, but I do have this rice seasoning that has some sesame seeds, so I'm just gonna go ahead and put that in. I'm gonna start with the soy sauce, and I'm just going to go ahead and add in 2 tablespoons. So this is the sesame oil. So I'm going to go ahead and just add in 1 tablespoon of sesame oil, our rice vinegar, we're gonna go ahead and add in 2 tablespoons. I think that looks pretty good. I'll test and see how this is after it's blended, and then we can assess. I'm gonna go ahead and put in our spice component. So these are just the red chili flakes. And you want to put in a pretty large amount. I'm gonna just eyeball it. And you can use basically any type of chilies. It really just comes down to your spice tolerance and your spice preference. So we're gonna see how this is. So I added about a tablespoon and a half. And I'm gonna go ahead and add in my sesame seeds. I'm just gonna do a large sprinkle. This also has some seaweed flakes, but I don't think that will make much of a difference. So now I'm gonna go ahead and blend this up, and then I'll show you what this looks like. So this is what my mixture looks like. It's very dark, but I'm going to go ahead and taste it and see if this is what I think my kimchi should taste like. I think it's very good. I think that I might go ahead and add in, it's very spicy. However, I think that it is a little bit overpowered by the soy sauce, so I am gonna go ahead and add in a little bit more rice vinegar, just like a little bit. And then I'm also just gonna go ahead and add in a little bit more sesame oil. This is a very rich taste though, so just like a little bit. And as spicy as it is, I do believe it needs a little bit more. I'm just gonna go ahead and like mix it with my spatula, and this is what mine looks like. It tastes like kimchi, like flavoring, so that's good. Now I'm going to, if you can tell, it's very actually difficult to see, but my mixture has released liquid. So now I'm going to go ahead and rinse this thoroughly so there's no more salt in here, and then I'm going to pour in our brine. Okay, so now that my mixture, my veggie mixture has been completely rinsed and is no longer salty, I would recommend tasting it, because at first I tasted it and it was very salty, so I had to rinse it a couple more times, and now it's perfect. Now I'm going to go ahead and add in our brine. I don't want to waste any, so I'm putting some from the top, and then I'm going to pour this in. Mine ended up being a very opaque consistency, but I believe that's just because I blended it. There's different methods to this. You could have just like poured in your liquids and your powders and everything just whole without blending. I saw very different videos, and then some blended, some didn't. I thought it would make the flavors combine a little bit more if I did go ahead and blend it, so that's what I did. So now that I've put in the majority of my sauce, I'm just gonna go ahead and mix it. So this is what it's looking like, and I will show you what it looks like once it's mixed. So after your kimchi has been thoroughly mixed, I am going to put it into a jar container in order for it to ferment. For cucumber kimchi, fermentation is not as long as your traditional cabbage kimchi, which could basically the longer it is fermented, the better it tastes. For cucumber kimchi, you really only need about like 2 to 3 days for it to be well fermented. So I'm going to do that. Also, another thing about this type of kimchi is that it's very good before fermentation as well. So you can go ahead and taste it before it is sealed. So that's why I'm only going to be making a small amount of fermented, and then the rest of it I will save for later tonight for dinner. This is what our cucumbers are looking like right now. I am going to go ahead and taste it, but I do think that if I were to do this again, I would not blend it, just so it's not super thick and it's more like a clear consistency with a little bit more like chili flakes rather than just like a paste. But that's just personal preference. I will update you in a couple days once this has fermented, and we will compare what taste is right now, because right now this is very crunchy, and our cucumbers aren't very much infused by the kimchi powder. It's more like, or the kimchi brine, it's more like covered in it rather than infused, and I feel like it will become a little bit more infused after it has been fermenting. Okay, so this is what the kimchi looks like after a week of fermenting. There's definitely a lot more like liquid in there, and it looks like the cucumber has kind of shriveled a little bit, like it doesn't look as crunchy anymore. But what really is important is how the flavor has changed and how fermentation has caused that flavor to change. So I think I'm just gonna go ahead and try a piece right now. So the kimchi is definitely less crunchy, but it's still crunchy. It's still crunchy. It still has that juicy texture, but the kimchi flavor is a lot more intense than what was before it was fermented. So when I was first making it, I said that the salt allowed for fermentation to occur, which is true. But now, like, diving in deeper into what fermentation actually is and like what's actually happening at the microbial level is, so first of all, the reason this became stronger and more tangy is because of fermentation. Basically, through fermentation, what happens is, although I showed you it uncovered, this was actually in a sealed container with very little oxygen in there, because in order for fermentation to occur, your kimchi needs to have no oxygen in there, so it goes through anaerobic respiration. So basically, our cucumber has healthy bacteria, which has its own bacterial community, which produces energy. And in order to produce this energy, it needs to have glucose. So the glucose we added through the pear that we had, because the pear has a lot of glucose in there, a lot of sugar. And basically, when these two react, when the bacteria from the cucumber and the glucose react, we're able to produce ATP. But not only are we producing energy, but because we're doing this without oxygen in our reaction, we also are producing we're producing less ATP than we would have if we had oxygen, but we're producing CO2. Because I had it open for a little bit before starting this video, you couldn't see any of the CO2 bubbles, but sometimes at the very beginning of the fermentation process, you can see little bubbles of oxygen. Again, I didn't have a lot in this container, so maybe that's why I wasn't able to see it, but there should be CO2 bubbles. There should also be H2O, which is why this may be a little bit more liquidy, or this might also just be because the cucumber has become less crunchy. Produce ATP, but it also produces lactic acid. So basically, lactic acid is what gives fermentation its flavor, what gives it its tangy umami flavor. So because we seal our kimchi and because we salt it and we take out all the juices and we have no oxygen in there and we let it sit, these bacteria go through that respiration process, anaerobic respiration, without any oxygen, and they produce lactic acid. This lactic acid is what causes fermentation, that taste of fermentation, and why these are able to last longer than they would have if we had not fermented them. The whole purpose of fermentation is to keep your fresh fruit edible for longer. Although they don't have the same structure, or they might be a little bit flimsy, and you need to coat them in some other flavor, they're still edible. And they may not have been edible if I hadn't fermented them. And it gives it an amazing taste with other dishes.